Right. So I've got a plan. 3, actually. But the good one is this. There's a bloke in Hobart doing prefabricated modular housing for regional councils, social housing, emergency accommodation, that end of the market. And he's a builder, not a designer. And his product looks like a shipping container with ambitions. I've done sketches, 12 pages. Same footprint, same cost envelope, 40% better in terms of thermal performance, and about 400% better to look at. And I sent it to him on the 2nd of April, and he replied in 11 minutes. Which in my experience means something. That's the plan. I'm 60 years old, and I'm about to have the best decade of my career, and I need you to understand that before I tell you the rest. Because otherwise the rest is going to sound like a tragedy, and it isn't. It's a setback. There's a difference, and the difference is enormous. Everyone I tell this to wants me to be devastated. My daughter wants it. My ex-wife, in her way, wants it. There was a bloke at a barbecue in Adelaide at Christmas who kept saying mate at me in a voice like a hand on the shoulder, and I wanted to put him through the fence. I'm not devastated. I lost $433,000 and I'm fine. And I've got 12 pages of sketches and a bloke in Hobart who replied in 11 minutes. Anyway, the rest of it. I'm an architect. Was. Am. You don't stop. It's not a job you can put down. Ask anyone who's tried. 32 years, Adelaide mostly, mid-size practice, 4 partners at our peak, residential and small commercial, not famous, good. There's a difference there too, and it took me 20 years to be at peace with it. Then 2019 happened. You'll know about the cladding if you're Australian, and you'll have no idea if you're not, so combustible external cladding, aluminium composite panels with a polyethylene core, used across the country through the 2000s and into the 2010s, because it was cheap and light and everybody used it, and the certification framework said it was fine. Then Grenfell, and then the audits, and then the discovery that a very large number of Australian buildings were wrapped in something that burns. We had 2, a 4-story mixed use in the inner north, and a residential block near the coast, both signed off. Both compliant with the standards as they were interpreted at the time by the certifiers, the fire engineers, and everybody else in the chain. I want to be clear because I've had to be clear about this in rooms where it mattered. I was not found to have done anything wrong. Not by the tribunal, not by the board, not by anyone. The specification was industry standard, the certification was independent, and the finding was that the failure was systemic rather than individual. That's the finding. Here's the reality. Professional indemnity insurance for cladding exposure became, in about 18 months, either unobtainable or priced at a level that no mid-size practice could carry. You cannot practice without it. 2 partners left for larger firms that could absorb it. The remediation litigation ground on and consumed the rest, and in March 2021, we wound up the practice. And I walked out of a building I'd worked in for 19 years, with a buyout of $530,000 and a professional reputation that was technically spotless and functionally finished. 55 years old, cleared of everything. Nobody would return a call. Julie and I finished in 2020, in the middle of it. 26 years. It wasn't the cladding. I want to be fair to her. It had been going for a long time. But the cladding was the thing that made it impossible to keep pretending. She's remarried now, to a very decent man who fixes agricultural machinery and has never once been to a tribunal, and I mean that entirely without sarcasm. Then 18 months of nothing. I'll be quick about that part because it's boring, and because it's the only bit of this I genuinely can't look at directly. I had $530,000 and a rented townhouse in Prospect, and a folder on my laptop called Ideas, with about 90 files in it, and no client to give any of them to. I designed a house for a block I didn't own. I designed a community center for a suburb that hadn't asked. At one point, I did a full set of drawings. Full set, sections, details, the lot, for a beach shack that existed nowhere except in my head. That's what an architect does when you take the clients away. You don't stop drawing. You just start drawing futures nobody's going to build. Hold on to that. It's the whole thing. Phuket was a holiday in January 2022 that I extended twice. Rawai, down the southern end, which if you don't know it is the quiet corner. Long shallow bay, fishing boats, a seafood market, Nothing like the Patong you're imagining. I stayed in a place near the beach, and I walked a lot, and I looked at buildings, because that's what I do. And I want to tell you about that specifically because it's the moment. Thai residential architecture in that part of the island in 2022 was, and I'm going to be blunt, a lot of extremely expensive, very badly conceived buildings. Enormous glazed boxes with no eaves in a tropical climate, so you're running air conditioning at war with your own west elevation from 2 in the afternoon. Beautiful sites treated as if the land were flat. Pools placed where the wind comes across them all afternoon. And I stood on a road above Nai Harn in February 2022, looking down at about $11 million worth of houses built by people who had never once considered where the sun goes. And I felt something come back on that had been switched off since 2019. There was work here. Not paid work. I couldn't work. I knew that much. No work permit. No Thai license. But there was a problem here. An actual design problem. Sitting in the landscape unsolved. And after 18 months of drawing futures for nobody, I would have paid money to be given a problem. I moved in September 2022. Retirement visa. Non-immigrant OA. Arranged through the consulate in Sydney before I left. And I want to note for people who care about this, I did the deposit route, 800,000 baht in a Thai account in my own name, which I've maintained ever since, and which is the one thing in this entire story I did correctly and never varied. I met May on the 9th of November 2022 in a tile showroom on Chow Pha West. Not a bar, a tile showroom. I was there because I was helping. Unpaid, informally, as a favor. An English couple who were renovating a villa and who had asked me to look at their plans, and I'd found about 9 things wrong with them, and we'd gone to look at floor finishes. She was 26, and she was an assistant at an interior design firm in Phuket town, and she was there with her own client, and what happened is that she overheard me explaining to the English couple why the large format porcelain they'd chosen was going to be a nightmare on that particular substrate, and she stopped, and she said, in English, unprompted, to a stranger, "You are wrong about the movement joints." She wasn't. I was right about the movement joints, but she'd said it in front of my clients, and her clients, and she was 26 years old, and I have never in my life been so pleased to be argued with. We spent 40 minutes on it, in a tile showroom. Her client left. I want to describe what the next 10 months were actually like, because if I don't get this right, then everything after it looks stupid, and it wasn't stupid. It was the best thing that ever happened to me, and I'd like it recorded that way. She was good, not promising, not good for her age, good. She had an eye for proportion that you cannot teach. I've taught, I've had graduates for 15 years, you cannot teach it. And she had the other thing, the thing that's rarer, which is that she could be told she was wrong, and would go away, and come back 3 days later having actually thought about it. Her firm had her doing FF&E schedules and chasing suppliers. Fixtures, furniture, and equipment. She was, in the structure of that office, essentially a very expensive shopper, and she'd been doing it for 4 years, and the ceiling above her was made of glass and welded shut. Her boss was a Bangkok man in his 50s, who put his own name on presentations she had drawn. We started meeting on Thursdays, then Thursdays and Sundays. Then it was not a schedule anymore. And what we did, and I need you to hear this properly, was design. She'd bring me a job she was stuck on, and I'd redraw it and explain what I'd done. I taught her sun path diagrams. I taught her how to read a contour survey properly and how to sit a building on a slope instead of on a platform bulldozed out of one. She taught me about Thai construction sequencing, about what a local crew will and won't do, about which details will simply not be built the way you draw them no matter what you put on the sheet. I was 60 and I had been told by an entire industry that I was over, and a 26-year-old was arguing with me about eaves overhangs on a Sunday afternoon and taking notes. Now, the house. The idea was hers. I want to be accurate about that because it matters enormously, and because I have gone over the origin of it about 900 times. In June 2023, we were driving back from Kata, and she pointed at a piece of land above the coast road on the way into Rawai. Sloped, awkward northeast aspect with a slot view of the bay. The sort of block that developers walk away from because you can't put a rectangle on it. And she said, "That one. You could do something with that one." And I could. God, I could. I could see it from the car. We bought it in August 2023. 3.9 million baht, which was about 163,000 Australian at the rate that month. In her name. Obviously in her name. Foreigners cannot own land in Thailand. That's not obscure. I'd read about it before I got on the plane, and so has everybody watching this. That's not the mistake. That has never been the mistake. Every foreigner with a house in Thailand has land in somebody else's name, or a company, or a lease. The mistake was everything I didn't do afterwards, and I'm going to go through it properly, because it's the only thing I've got that's worth anything to you. We started on site in November 2023. 14 months. I was there almost every day. I want to tell you about those 14 months, but I'm aware I could talk for 6 hours, so I'll compress. 240 square meters over 3 split levels, stepping down the slope, so no cut-and-fill platform. The building sits on the land instead of on top of it. Deep eaves, 1.8 meters on the west, which every builder on the island told me was excessive, and which meant that in the middle of April you could stand in that living room at 3 in the afternoon, with the doors open and no air conditioning on. Cross ventilation on every level. A concrete frame with local rendered blockwork, hardwood screens on the western openings that I detailed myself and which took the joiner in Thailand 4 attempts. Pool on the middle level, oriented so the prevailing wind runs along it rather than across it. The best building I have ever designed. In 32 years. Not the biggest and not the most expensive, and I don't care. It was the best. And I knew it while I was doing it. And there is a specific kind of happiness in that which I had entirely stopped expecting to feel again. Construction cost 7,400,000 baht. Then landscaping, the pool plant, the joinery, and about 1.6 million of furniture and fittings which May specified, and which were, I have to say, better than anything I would have chosen. Total, land and all, 12.9 million baht. 433,000 Australian dollars, near enough, across 2 years of transfers, of 530. The permits were in her name because the land was in her name, and that's how it works. The building contract was between her and the contractor, because she spoke Thai and dealt with them daily, and because putting a foreigner's name on a construction contract raises questions about work permits that I was told, correctly, to avoid. The utilities went in her name. The house registration book, when it came, was in her name, and I paid for every baht of it, and I was on that site every single day, and I never registered one thing. Craig said something in about March 2024. Craig's a Queenslander who'd been in Rawai 11 years running a dive operation, and he came up to look at the build because I couldn't stop showing people, and he stood on the middle level and said all the right things, and then on the way down to the cars he said, "Mate, you got paper?" I said the land's in her name. You know how it works. And he said, "Nah, paper. Have you got paper?" I told him it was in hand, which was true. That's the thing, it was true. Because I had done it. I had actually done it. In February 2024, I went to a Thai lawyer in Phuket town called Kittipong. A serious man, properly qualified, recommended by 2 people, and I paid him 35,000 baht. And we prepared the documents. A registered Superficies over the structure, so that I would own the building itself, which a foreigner is entitled to do. The land is hers. The house is mine. Registered at the land office, on the back of the title deed, binding on anyone who ever owns that land afterwards.
30 years or my lifetime.
And alongside it a registered lease over the land. And Kittipong also suggested, and drafted, a loan agreement with a mortgage registered in my favor, so that the money I was putting in was a secured debt rather than a gift. He explained the priority rule to me. Whoever registers first ranks first, he said, and I remember it exactly because I've repeated it to myself several hundred times. Register it before the building has value, not after. I had the documents, signed by me, sitting in a plastic folder in the second drawer of the desk in the rented place on Soi Sai Yuan, for 14 months. Because I never found the right afternoon to ask her. That's it. That's the whole failure. And I want to be very precise about the psychology, because the psychology is the transferable part. It was never that I suspected her and lost my nerve. It's that the conversation felt like it belonged to a different relationship than the one I was in. Every day I was on that site with her at 7 in the morning arguing about screen spacing. And every evening we were eating on the balcony with the drawings on the table. And at no point in any of that was there a natural moment to say, before we go any further, I'd like a security interest registered over your property. There was always a better week coming. The pour was happening. Her mother was ill in October. It was Songkran. The joiner was on his 4th attempt at the screens, and we were both furious about it. And underneath all of that, the real reason, which took me until about November to be able to say, I did not want to find out what she'd say. Not because I thought she'd say no, because whatever she said, the asking would have changed what we were, and what we were was the only thing I had that had gone right since 2019. So I designed the security, drew it up properly, took advice, paid the fee. And then I put it in a drawer, because filing it would have meant admitting it was necessary. I've spent my whole career telling clients that a beautiful drawing that never gets built is worth precisely nothing. Let me give you 3 days from that 14 months, because otherwise this is all just numbers, and the numbers are the least of it. The 19th of January, 2024. The first floor slab pour, 6 in the morning, because you pour early in Phuket or you don't pour at all. Wichai had 11 men and a pump truck that arrived 40 minutes late, and there is a window. You know this if you've ever done it, where a pour either goes right or it doesn't, and there is nothing to do but be there. May turned up at 6:10 with 30 coffees in a cardboard tray for the crew, and stood in the mud in boots for 5 hours. At about 11, Wichai said something to her in Thai, and she laughed properly, from the stomach, and then translated it for me. He says the Farang draws too many lines, but he shows up. I have thought about that sentence a great deal. The 2nd of August, 2024. The screens. The joiner in Thailand had failed 3 times. The spacing was wrong, then the fixings were visible, then the timber moved because he hadn't seasoned it properly. And I had been, I will admit, difficult about it. May drove out there on her own without telling me, and spent an afternoon with him, and came back with a modification to my detail that solved it, which involved a concealed aluminium spine I had not thought of and would not have thought of. She presented it to me on paper, properly drawn, to scale, with a section. She was right. I told her she was right, and she said, I know, and went to have a shower. The 14th of November, 2024. Nothing happened. That's why I'm telling you about it. It rained all day, work stopped, and we sat on the half-finished middle level on 2 upturned buckets under the slab above with the rain coming down off the eaves in a solid sheet, and we didn't talk for about 40 minutes, and it was the single most contented I have ever been in my life. I'm 60, and I'm telling you about 2 buckets. That's what $433,000 bought. And I want to be honest that if you offered me the money back in exchange for those 14 months, I would have to think about it for longer than is comfortable, and that the thinking would not be quick, and that I'm not certain which way it would go. I've made a list since. Everybody does, apparently. Mine has 7 things on it, and I'll give it to you quickly, because the individual items are useless, and the shape of them isn't. She never once discussed living in the house. Not once, in 14 months. I talked about it constantly. Where the Christmas tree would go, which room her mother would have when she came, whether we'd need a second fridge. She engaged with every one of those conversations warmly and specifically, and she never initiated one, not a single time. I have gone back through my memory very carefully on this, and I am certain of it. She was extremely interested in the resale characteristics, which sounds sinister and is actually completely normal. Every good designer thinks about resale. I taught graduates to think about resale, but she raised it in a particular way. Would a buyer want 4 bedrooms rather than 3? Was the pool big enough to photograph well? Should the guest level have its own entrance for flexibility? I answered all of it as a professional, and I was pleased she was thinking that way, and I'd say the same things again. She did an English course in early 2024. IELTS preparation, Tuesday and Thursday evenings in Phuket town, and she told me it was for work, because the firm dealt with international clients, and that was entirely plausible, and probably even partly true. Her phone had a folder on it called AU. I saw it once, over her shoulder, in about May 2024, and I assumed it was suppliers. There's a lot of Australian and New Zealand product in that market, timber, hardware, pool systems, and I never thought about it again until August 2025. In October 2024, she was extremely stressed for about 3 weeks and said it was her mother's health, and her mother was genuinely unwell that autumn, and I now know that October 2024 is when the visa application went in. She stopped bringing her own work to me around the middle of 2024. The Sunday sessions where she'd arrive with a job she was stuck on, those tailed off, and I thought it was because she was busy with our site, and I was pleased, because it meant she was learning enough not to need me, and she took photographs. Constantly, for 14 months, of everything, at every stage, in good light, from good positions, thousands of them. I thought she was documenting our house. Every one of those has an innocent reading, and I gave all 7 the innocent reading. And I want to say clearly that 6 of them still deserve it. The photographs are the one that gets me, because I helped. I'd say, wait, stand there, the light's better from the corner. I art directed the marketing material for the sale of my own house, and I did it enthusiastically, in the sun, over 14 months. We finished on the 11th of February 2025. Practical completion, the joinery was in, the pool was commissioned, the landscaping had 6 weeks of growing to do, and the rest of it was done. We had about 40 people up there on the Saturday. Craig came. The English couple from the tile showroom came. Wichai, the site foreman, brought his whole crew and his wife, and they stayed until 1 in the morning. And I have a photograph of Wichai standing in the middle level with his hands on his hips looking at the ceiling. And I would not sell that photograph for anything on earth. May made a speech in Thai, and then a shorter one in English, and she said the house was the first thing she'd worked on that she was proud of. I believed her. I still believe her. That's not the part that was false either. The listing went up on the 4th of March 2025. I didn't know. I want to be accurate. I didn't know. And I've since found the listing archived, and it was up for 11 weeks, and it was on 2 agency sites and a Facebook page. And I never saw it, because I don't look at Phuket property listings, because why would I? I lived in one. It sold in June. 15.8 million baht to a Singaporean buyer, through a Phuket agency, with the sale registered at the Phuket land office. She was entitled to sell it. That's the thing that people cannot get their heads around, and it's the most important sentence in this entire account. It was her land. Her title deed, her name, lawfully acquired, correctly registered, her building permit, her construction contract, her house, in every sense the Thai legal system recognizes, because there was nothing, not one thing, recorded on the back of that deed in my favor. No superficies, no lease, no mortgage, no encumbrance of any kind. She didn't steal anything. She sold her own property. The documents that would have made that impossible were in a plastic folder in a desk drawer 11 kilometers away, signed by me, for 14 months. I found out on the 9th of August 2025, at a birthday party in Rawai. I want to describe this properly, because it's the worst thing that's ever happened to me, and it happened at a party with a cake on the table. Her cousin Mali, 30-something, works in hotel administration, lovely woman, I'd met her perhaps a dozen times, came over to me with her phone out and was scrolling, and she said, "Oh, have you seen?" And she turned the screen round. It was a photograph of a kitchen, small, white, well lit, with a window behind the sink and a bit of Melbourne winter sky through it. Mali said, "Her apartment, Carlton, she sent last week. Very small, but so nice, no?" And I said, and I can hear my own voice saying it, "Which apartment?" And Mali's face did something. She was still smiling for about a second and a half, and then the smile came off in stages, and she looked at the phone, and she looked at me, and she said, very quietly, in a completely different voice, "You don't know." She assumed I knew. That's the thing. Of course she assumed I knew. I was the boyfriend. I was the architect. I was the man who'd been on that site every day for 14 months. There was no scenario in Mali's head where the house sold in June, and I was standing at a party in August finding out from a phone. She started crying before I did. I want that in the record. That woman was so distressed on my behalf that she had to go and sit in a car. May had left for Melbourne on the 26th of July, 14 days before the party. She had a student visa. She'd applied in October 2024, while we were finishing the joinery, for a Master of Interior Architecture at a university in Melbourne, starting February 2026, with an English language pathway course beforehand. She had been accepted in January 2025, 3 weeks before the house was finished. The financial requirement for that visa is not small. Tuition for the course, plus the mandated living cost figure, plus evidence of capacity, and for a 26-year-old Thai national on an assistant salary at a Phuket design firm it is, in practical terms, unreachable. 15.8 million baht is about 670,000 Australian dollars. Course fees, apartment in Carlton, living costs for 3 years, and a very considerable amount left over. She'd been planning it since at least 2023. That's not speculation, the cousin knew. The timeline is documented. The application predates completion by 4 months. And I've had 11 months to work out what that means, and I've arrived somewhere that nobody likes, and that I'm confident is correct. She was doing exactly what I was doing. I was designing a future. That's what I do. That's what I did for 32 years. That's what I did in a rented townhouse in Prospect, with a folder called Ideas. I drew a future with a house on a slope above Rawai, and a woman in it who argued with me about eaves. She was designing one too. Same discipline, same seriousness, same 2-year build program. Hers had a kitchen in Carlton with a bit of gray sky through the window, and a master's degree, and a career with her own name on the presentations. Mine had her in it. Hers did not have me in it, and she never said so. And she let me spend $433,000 building the funding mechanism, and she knew, and she let me. That's not a woman who fell into something. That's an ambitious person who saw a route out of a welded shut ceiling and took it, knowingly, at my expense. I'm not going to soften that. I'm also not going to pretend I don't understand it, because I have looked at that glass ceiling she was under and I know what I would have done at 26 with a talent I couldn't use. Both things. All the time. That's just how it is now. I went back to Kitty Pong on the 12th of August with the folder from the drawer. He is a kind man, and he did not say a single unnecessary word. He looked at the documents, which he had drafted himself 18 months earlier, and he checked the date on the signature page, and he asked whether they had ever been lodged, and I said no. He asked whether there was any written agreement of any kind between us regarding the funds. Any document. An email describing it as a loan, a message, a note. There wasn't. There were about 11,000 messages between us, most of them about buildings, and not one of them said the word loan, because we never had that conversation, because having it would have meant having it. He asked whether the transfers to the contractor had gone from my account or hers. Hers, mostly. I transferred to her. She paid the contractor, because the contract was hers, and the invoices were addressed to her, some direct, most not. And he explained the position, which I already knew, because I'd known it since Malie turned the phone round. The land was lawfully hers. The building was lawfully hers, because I had never registered a Superficies, and a building follows the land, unless a registered right says otherwise. The sale was lawful. The proceeds were hers. My contributions, undocumented and unsecured, made in the context of a personal relationship, over 2 years, voluntarily. Those are gifts, completed on transfer. Final. Not fraud. Not theft. There is no offense here. There is a man who spent $433,000 improving an asset he did not own, and took no security over it. And Thai law has an extremely clear view about what that is. He said I could bring a civil claim on unjust enrichment. He was honest about the odds, that it's arguable, that it's not hopeless, that the sums and the documentary trail of transfers are at least evidence of something, and that it would take 3 to 4 years, cost between 1 and 2 million baht, and be enforced against a person who is now resident in Australia and whose money is now in an Australian bank. I asked how much of it was recoverable in the best realistic case. He said, perhaps some. He said it in a way that meant no. I did contact her. Once. People always ask, and I've stopped being coy about it. I wrote it on the 14th of August, and I sent it on the 17th, which tells you something about the 3 days in between. It was long. It was much too long. It was about 1,100 words, and about 400 of those were, God help me, about the building, because I could not stop being an architect for the length of a single message. She replied 31 hours later, and it was 6 lines. She said she was sorry. She said she had not planned it at the start, which I do not believe, and which I think she may believe. She said that she had tried 3 times to tell me, and had not been able to. And then she said the thing that I've had to carry, which was, you never asked me what I wanted. You only ever showed me what you had drawn. I've thought about that for 11 months, and my position on it has moved about 4 times, and where I've landed is this. It's not a defense. It doesn't come close to being a defense. You do not answer $433,000 with a critique of somebody's conversational style, and she knows that, and I suspect she wrote it because she needed something to be true that was more comfortable than the alternative. But it is also, as an observation about me, completely accurate. I have been told a version of it by my ex-wife. I have been told a version of it by 2 former partners. I am a man who arrives with the drawings already done, and who presents them beautifully, and who genuinely believes that presenting them is the same thing as asking. I designed a life with her in it, and I showed it to her, 40 or 50 times, in enormous detail, with sections. I never once sat still and asked her what she was drawing. She'd have lied. I'm almost certain she'd have lied, but I never gave her the chance to. And there is a version of that conversation in about June 2023, where she says something guarded and I notice, and the whole thing goes differently. I haven't written again, and I'm not going to. Craig took it worse than I did, which was strange to be on the receiving end of. He came round the day after the party and stood in my kitchen and was so angry he couldn't sit down, and at one point he said, "I asked you, mate. I asked you about the paper," and then stopped himself and apologized, and I told him not to, because he had asked. In March 2024, on the path down to the cars, in 5 words, and I'd said it was in hand, and it was in hand. It was in a drawer in the second desk in a rented house on Soi Sai Yuan, signed, waiting for an afternoon that never came. He rings me every Sunday now. He's done it for 11 months without once making it a thing. I've never told him it's the reason I got through November. Now, the accounting, and then the useful part, and then I want to tell you about Hobart. Land, 3.9 million baht. Construction, 7,400,000. Landscaping, pool plant, joinery, and FF&E, 1.6 million. 12.9 million baht total. 433,000 Australian, across 2 years of transfers. Plus the 35,000 baht I paid Kittipong to draft documents I never lodged, which I think is the funniest thing in this entire story, and which I bring up at parties now, to the visible distress of everyone present. I have $97,000 left, plus the 800,000 baht in the Visa account, plus a superannuation balance I can't touch for another year. 60 years old. Here's what I'd tell you. 4 things, and the 4th one is the one nobody says. 1. If you are putting money into property in a country where you cannot own the land, the ownership question is not the risk. Everybody knows about the ownership question. The risk is the security question, and they are completely different, and confusing them is what got me. Land in her name is normal and unavoidable. Land in her name with nothing registered in your favor is not normal. It's a donation with a house on it. 2. Register first. Not eventually. First, before the value exists. Priority in Thailand runs by the date the entry goes on the back of the title deed, and a Superficies or a lease or a mortgage registered before construction sits ahead of everything that comes after it and makes the property extremely difficult to sell without your involvement. A lender looking at that deed sees an encumbrance that survives the sale and walks away. A buyer's lawyer sees it and rings you. The registration is not just protection, it's a tripwire, and mine was in a drawer. 3. Get the money on paper as a loan and secure it. A written loan agreement plus a mortgage registered in your own favor makes you a creditor rather than a donor, and a foreigner is perfectly entitled to be a mortgagee in Thailand even though he cannot own the land. Kittipong drafted mine. It cost about 11,000 baht of the 35. It has never been filed. 4. And this is the one. Improving an asset you do not own is a gift, and the better you are at it, the bigger the gift. That's the part I never saw coming, and it's the part that's specific to people like me. I'm good at this. That house sold in 11 weeks in a soft market at a price that reflected 14 months of the best work of my career. The eaves, the orientation, the way it sits on the slope instead of on a platform. Every single decision I made on that site to make the building better made the eventual sale easier and the eventual proceeds larger. I didn't just fund her exit. I designed it, detailed it, supervised its construction, and stood in it at 1 in the morning in February with a beer feeling prouder than I'd felt in 6 years. If I'd been a worse architect, I'd have lost less money. So if you're a builder, a designer, an engineer, a tradesman, if you're one of those men who cannot walk past a problem without solving it, and you find yourself pouring that into something that isn't legally yours, the competence is not protecting you. The competence is the exposure. Register something first. There's a fifth thing, and it isn't practical. It's just true. And I've put it last, because I've only recently been able to say it. Watch what you do with a second chance. That's what this was. That's what it was for. I was 57 and cleared of everything and finished. And then there was a slope above Rawai and a problem worth solving and someone who argued with me about movement joints. And I want you to understand that I did not walk into that with my eyes shut. I walked into it starving. A man who has been told he's over will run at the first thing that makes him feel useful, and he will not stop to read the documents, because reading the documents is a thing you do when you have options. I had no options. I had 90 files in a folder called Ideas, and nobody to give them to, and then somebody handed me a piece of land and said do something with it. I'd have signed anything. I did, effectively, sign nothing, which turns out to be the same thing. So if you are in the middle of a second chance, new country, new person, new project, at 55 or 60 or 65, after something took the first life off you, that is exactly the moment your judgment is worst, and exactly the moment your judgment to hear it. The hunger that makes you brave enough to start again is the same hunger that stops you asking the awkward question in month 3. Do the paperwork in the first 90 days, while it still feels like admin, and before it starts to feel like an accusation. There is a window at the beginning of every one of these things where the security conversation is completely normal, and it closes, and you will not notice it closing. Right, Hobart, 12 pages. Modular units, 420 millimeter eaves. You can't do 1.8 on a modular, but you can do 420 and it changes everything. Cross-ventilated, oriented on-site rather than dropped on a slab facing whatever direction the truck came from. Costs him about $900 a unit more, and I've costed the operational saving at about $400 a year on cooling alone. He replied in 11 minutes. We've spoken 4 times. He's flying me over in September. I know what this sounds like. My daughter Steph rang me in October and asked, very carefully, whether I'd thought about talking to someone, and I said I was fine. And she said, Dad, you've had 3 new projects since August. And I said, yes, that's what recovery looks like. She said, that's what not stopping looks like. I've thought about that. She might be right. There's a version of the last 11 months where I've drawn about 600 hours of work for people who haven't commissioned it in order to avoid sitting still in a room. Because the last time I sat still in a room was Prospect in 2021, and I nearly didn't come out of it. I'm not going to sit still. I'm 60. Sitting still is not available to me, and I don't recommend it to anyone. But I'll give you the honest thing, and then I'm done. About once a fortnight, I open the file. It's called Raw AI, Final, Issued, and it's 140 sheets, and I know every one of them. And I go through it, not looking for anything. Just going through it, the way you'd go through photographs. There's a family living in that house now. Singaporean, I'm told. 2 kids. And on the 11th of April, at about 3 in the afternoon, they'll be standing in that living room with the doors open and no air conditioning on, and they won't know why it works, and they'll never know who I am, which is, if you think about it properly, exactly what I signed up for at 22. That's the job. You make the thing, and then it belongs to somebody else, and you go and make another one. I just wish I'd got the paperwork right on that last one. Hobart in September, 12 pages. 11 minutes.